William Shakespeare wrote some of the greatest comedies and tragedies in literature, stories that shape how we perceive the world today. He also wrote a series of history plays that contain some of the best political drama out there. Drama that explores claims to power and national identity. But his history plays are so often overlooked. For anyone looking to dive into the history plays, King John comes first in the historical chronology. This play tells of the clash between King John of England and Philip of France, as they each make rival claims to who should be the rightful heir of the English crown after Richard the Lionheart has passed. I'm going to lay out some guideposts to help you get the most out of this play. I'll talk about the political backdrop in the opening act, and then after that I want to talk about commodity, this prevalent theme throughout the play that drives the characters' actions. And then finally, I want to touch on why I think this play is overlooked, given that it poses such compelling dilemmas. I'm Nathan Harold, and I'm excited to unlock this work with you today. If you know nothing about King John, you're not alone. Even many Shakespeare aficionados know very little about this play. So quickly, King John is a play about contested claims. The play spans much of the life of King John, beginning when he makes his first claim to the crown after his older brother Richard the Lionheart dies. It takes place at the end of the 12th century and beginning of the 13th century. We follow his life as he challenges the French, rebels against the church, and then grapples with insurrection. There's a lot of good stuff here. There's war, family drama, betrayal, grief, and even though it's a history play, remember, Shakespeare is always more interested in telling an entertaining story rather than sticking to historical truth. But he does respect the main events. Although the play is named for King John, there's a very large cast. One of my favorites, the bastard, chooses glory over inheriting land early on, and I found him to be one of the best characters in early Shakespeare. I'm going to talk about the bastard a little bit more, but right off the bat, just keep in mind King John is not one of the most interesting characters, even though the play is named after him. So let's get into it. Let's make clear what the political situation is at the opening of the play, because in the 21st century, I think you can get a little bit lost or bogged down in what's actually happening. Okay, so this is a play about power and arguing what grants power legitimacy. That's the key piece to hone in on, because different characters will have shifting arguments or the political situation will reshuffle several times throughout the play. So to understand this, let's go over the setup. This is England, late 12th century. King Richard the Lionheart has recently passed away. Now there's a dispute about succession because Richard the Lionheart had no children. Who becomes king? And this becomes a fight between siblings and nephews. Let me put up a chart. Just know that there were some sons who died earlier and they're irrelevant to the play, so I'm not including them in this chart. Henry II has 3 relevant sons. So Richard the Lionheart was the eldest son. Spent a lot of time beyond England's borders, battling, crusading, fighting in France. He dies, no kids. That's a problem. Henry II's second son, Geoffrey, he died almost 15 years before. He does have a son though, young Arthur. Arthur's a kid in France, and even though he's a kid, he's a duke because he inherited land from his father. And then there's John. John is the youngest brother, but he makes a genealogical claim that he's closer to Richard the Lionheart. France and Arthur argue that Arthur is the correct descendant. Today, England's succession laws actually follow Arthur's logic. Okay, but when you're arguing with someone and you make a claim and they make a claim that might seem a little bit better, what do? You make another claim. And that's what King John does. He doesn't concede anything on the first point, but he moves to a second point, which is he has the crown. He's in England, he's wearing the crown, and Arthur is his child in France. So John's arguing he's already in the seat of power. Why should he bend the knee to someone in France? This young Arthur who is more French than English. And moreover, John's not just wearing a crown, he commands armies and he commands the loyalty of the nobility. So what John's essentially arguing at the beginning of the play is, I already have my hands on the levers of power. Therefore, doesn't that make me a king? This is important because it shows us that law is not the ultimate divine authority. And don't we see a little bit of that playing out today? Having the law on one side can help, but it's not the be-all and end-all, especially if the one in power can just shrug it off. But understand these political arguments and the rest of the play is going to flow. Enjoy the play. Just accept that characters are going to change their rationale when they feel like it's no longer getting them what they want. Which brings me to the next point. There's a word that's going to pop up throughout the play: commodity. Commodity, commodity, commodity. You're going to hear this a lot, and just know it has a different definition than what we use today. I'm not talking about oil or gold markets. In King John, and this is my definition, commodity is the advancement of self-interest by participating in a commercial exchange. So I mentioned how I like the character, the bastard. The bastard will speak to the audience. And in Act 2, he's going to take a pause and he's going to tell you what's going on with commodity. At this moment, King John and King Philip of France, they've been battling. Many lives have been lost. But then at the end of the day, they strike a deal. This agreement feels stark because up to this point, King John and King Philip have been applying so many different layers of logic. They've been battling. Many lives have been lost. And suddenly they just shake hands and agree on what to do next. So it's Act 2, and Bastard speaks to the audience, and he says, "Commodity, the bias of the world who of itself is paced well, made to run even upon even ground, till this advantage, this vile drawing bias, this sway of motion, this commodity, makes it take head from all indifferency, from all direction, purpose, course, intent, and this same bias, this commodity, hath drawn from him his own determined aid, from a resolved and honorable war to a most base and vile concluded peace." So the bastard's making the case, these royals, they don't really care about the cause from any moral or ethical stance. They don't even really care about the crown or the lands or the marriages or dowry. They care about getting a good deal for themselves. And then Bastard says something at the end of his soliloquy, which I really liked. "And why I rail on this commodity? But for because he hath not wooed me yet. Well, whiles I am a beggar, I will rail, and they say there is no sin but to be rich." The Bastard doesn't blame them. He's just salty because he didn't get a cut. Commodity. Notice throughout the play how scores are settled or ignited by deals that are cut, and somebody is left out. Everybody wants their piece of the pie, but throughout the play, notice that those who hold the most power are dictating the terms of agreement, and the fallouts from these agreements drive the play. So, watch for commodity, but also watch for characters who are not driven by commodity. Their defining trait is conscience. So the play sets up this great tension between commodity and moral conscience. If commodity is benefiting from the acquisition of power, then conscience is the hidden cost. King John has to face this reckoning in the second half of the play, and how he grapples with it, or tries to negotiate with conscience, or seek a rationale that reconciles the two, is one of the play's strong points. Now let's answer why this play is so rarely mentioned. And the introduction of this edition actually notes that the play has largely disappeared from cultural view since the start of the 20th century. And I can agree with that. I think the only way a lot of us think of King John, if at all, is that cowardly, maneless lion in the Disney Robin Hood movie. And you might be wondering at this point, well, the play has good political drama, and it's got this interesting theme of commodity versus conscience. So what's the flaw? The flaw, in my view, is that while this play has a lot of strong ingredients, they don't mesh together too well. First, while I found a lot of the characters to be real scene stealers and very captivating, none of them really control the play. A lot of these characters have their moment and then they disappear. Let me take the Bastard because he's my favorite. He's conniving and he's ambitious, but he's also brave and he's also loyal. And we like him because he doesn't present a facade to the audience. But the Bastard will disappear for long stretches of the play, and he doesn't drive that much of the action. He's more of an interpreter to the audience. And then there are lesser characters. There is Eleanor, John's mother, who reminds me of an early version of Lady Macbeth. And then there's Constance, Arthur's mother. And I really like Constance. Early in the play, she's this ball of passion, unsteady and raving, and so eager to make sure that Arthur becomes the next king of England. And then she transforms, yanking her hair and slapping her knee like a grieving mother out of a Homeric epic. But these two characters, they exit the play before the halfway point. And there's a lot of characters. They have their scene or they have their act, and then they're done and they're gone, which leaves King John. He's temperamental and he acts more like an administrator than an actual force. He's not a charismatic regal leader. He's just this guy. And so it's a problem for King John when he's never the strongest part of his own scenes. The play really is carried by the ensemble around him. There's also some pacing issues. Early acts drag on a little bit too long, and then later acts and scenes kind of flicker by. Then the political situation changes in each act. So there's this disruptive element that's getting in the way of a clean narrative. And Shakespeare doesn't have these rough edges in his later and better works. I always grade Shakespeare on a scale where even his worst plays are worth reading. But if you are looking for a hidden gem, King John is not it. It's got good components, but it's not one of his better plays. It's also not one of his worst. If you want to see more videos on Shakespeare, consider subscribing. I'm going to do at least a couple more over the next few months. And if you've embarked on a read-through of the histories, let me know what your favorites are. Some of his best works are embedded in the histories. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you soon.